name is Royann Dean, and I will be moderating tonight. Welcome to the current Echo. So tonight's talk is called One Nation United in Trade and Fintech. And essentially what we're going to talk about tonight is trade and fintech, and what are the things that facilitate that in relation to the Bahamas, and in particular, the SandDollar. So with me this evening, I'm delighted to have fantastic panelists. So to my left is Bowe. He's the Group CEO of Fidelity Bank and Trust International Limited. Next is Dr. Jillian Bethel. She's a blockchain ecosystem builder, co-founder of Crypto Isle and EarnStream. And Gil Cassar, he's the CEO of Equity Group Business Development Limited. So let's welcome our guests, please. So I mentioned that we'll be talking about trade and fintech today. And I want to give just a little bit of an overview of our discussion tonight. We are going to be talking about the SandDollar, which was launched in the Bahamas to facilitate domestic financial transactions. Digital wallet providers were also launched, but the adoption of both digital currencies and digital wallets has been relatively slower than anticipated. So what we're going to talk about tonight is how, the introduction of new intermonetary banking systems can reduce transaction costs and speed and enable foreign transactions with central bank digital currencies. It can impact global transactions, global transactions, and the ability of Bahamian companies to be globally competitive. And fintech is going to play a big part in that. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm excited to get started. Before we start, just a few housekeeping notes here. We will speak for about 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and then we'll open the floor up to questions. Somebody will come around from the current team. They will come around with a mic, so you can just raise your hand and the mic will be brought over to you. We do ask that you ask your questions and allow others to also ask questions, and allow people to respond in the way in which they would like. So I hate to say a safe space, but it's a safe space, and just ask the questions that you want to know. All right, ready? Okay, so there are 3 retail central bank digital currencies that have launched called CBDCs, or RCBDCs, have launched in the Caribbean. That's the Bahamian SandDollar in 2020, Dcash from the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union in 2021, and the Jamaican JAMDEX in 2022. These CBDCs were intended to shift cash-based economies to digital economies. However, the success of the shift requires both widespread adoption of CBDCs by consumers and merchants, and its use in everyday low-value transactions. Now, the SandDollar went nationwide in 2023, and as of 2023, the value of the amount of SandDollar in circulation was about 0.19% of the total currency in circulation at that time. So to put this into perspective, the adoption of Dcash in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union was even smaller. That accounted for 0.16% of the total currency in circulation in 2023. In his remarks at the 2022 Digital Euro Conference, Central Bank Governor John Rold noted that a few critical factors leading to a very low adoption of the SandDollar. 1 was that merchants failed to participate in the SandDollar network. 2 was that the SandDollar was not integrated with the traditional banking system regarding merchant accounts. And 3, banks and credit unions were slow to sign on to the SandDollar project. So with that said, I'm going to start with some questions. And anyone can answer. From a traditional commercial bank financial institution's perspective, what structural changes beyond simply offering the service are needed to really drive mass usage and integrate the SandDollar and other CBDCs into everyday consumer and business banking?
Talk about a loaded question. I think important, when you read the earlier elements and the conversation piece, I would go back a little bit in terms of there's a mindset shift that is required, because I think sometimes the digital currency or the term digital currency creates apprehension. And the reason it creates apprehension is because it has been sort of confused with blockchain, cryptocurrency. And when I say confused, all of them have been used interchangeably, not understanding one is a technology, one is a volatile instrument that has value going up and down. And really, the central bank backed digital currencies are effectively just taking your paper notes and putting them into digital form. If we debunk, well, what is that sort of apprehension, or why do we have it? Do you remember having a bank book when your balance used to be printed in the book? There are a lot of persons older, right? I know, I may be showing my age, right? But there are a lot of my customers who remember that and tell me they need that back. I use that because we went from, if we talk about even biblical and pre-biblical days, to literally gold, silver units as currency, to effectively going into paper notes and coins that largely were in a bank account that was physically held, meaning that's why Billy the Kid robbed the banks, because they had all of the money in a vault in the back, to going into, when we talk about the Bretton Woods Convention with the US, and now talking about having it in digital form. So if we really asked ourselves the question, do we know where our money is today, right? The average person. And the answer is no. You go online, you go into the bank or an ATM, and you have a digital machine that tells you you have X amount of dollars. Before, it was very difficult in terms of you had to take out cash, traveler's checks, physical instruments. Now you have a debit card, a credit card, again, another digital form. So when we start talking about SandDollar and digital currency, I think we made it too exotic when it really isn't. All it is a continued evolution using technology in order to move away from where it is only my single bank that knows what my balance is, to using blockchain technology, which is the distributed ledger, and Jillian could talk about all the technicalities of that. But effectively, what I've done is created, backed by the central bank, which is an important notation here, that it isn't in the cloud and it isn't in hyperspace. It is the same dollar that's in your pocket, just in a digital form. And the way we expend it is now, instead of swiping or tapping or using a chip, is using a QR code. And the truth is, most people are fairly familiar with that, even right down to your logo, in terms of if you want to get onto the live stream. So we have to, I think, educate persons to say that this isn't something that is so exotic, and then we will start to have a more meaningful conversation about it.
Anybody else have thoughts on that? Because I just,
Yeah.
before you start, they have the messaging around the SandDollar has been that it's, I think they may be using the term fiat, right? It's fiat currency, but in a digital form, but it's backed by the central bank. So I can see the effort to simplify it, but I take your point.
So I thought Gowon was going to say some other things, right? And so now I'm going to say the other things and see if I could get something out of him about it, right? There's that R in front of the CBDC, the retail part of the CBDC. And when you look at the regulations or the legislation and you say, okay, like this is, yes, the same thing as you have in your bank account. It's the same thing. It's just a QR code and your phone instead of having a debit card or what have you. There is a slight difference, and that slight difference is whether there's wholesale usage, right? There's one part in the regulations that says that, SandDollar is not interest bearing. And that's the part there that I think, and I guess that's the question to you, that stops a whole lot of adoption. Because if it's not interest bearing, then why would you, as Fidelity, want to have reserves, want to go to central bank and take SandDollar and have people use that. Of course, the benefits on the retail side is that the rails to move money is far more efficient and the cost to you guys is less. But on the other side, if you're not getting any interest on it, then it makes no sense for you, right? And so that's one huge part of the adoption equation that I see is an issue. And then, I mean, for a later point, it would be how we approach the market, which we've already touched on.
Right.
So,
Right. I would add to those points to say that one of the key pieces when it comes to true adoption from a commercial banking perspective as well as a customer's perspective is with respect to KYC and ease of onboarding. If there is standardization and more simplicity around how people can onboard and what it looks like to match the satisfaction of the commercial banks, then I feel that there would be improved adoption. But not only that, quite frankly, it's an IT concentration. I believe that if the central bank, as well as the IT departments of the various commercial banks, are to ensure that there is a ledgering that is able to shore up the balances, which I'm sure is achievable, then this can quicken the pace of infrastructural adoption. Because I think that the key to the question was not just about the convenience of using the SandDollar, but about why is it that you can't easily move from your central bank digital currency and flip it back into your Fidelity Bank balance and then flip it back and so on. And that's an API and technology question. And then it's also a question around user onboarding.
And I'll address those two because I think, so to Jillian, I'm told I always talk too much, so I didn't address all of it as we go through the questions. But starting with Gil's first comment, that's one of the critical challenges is that, and I can speak for Fidelity, I can't speak for the others. What I'm not prepared to do is create a whole new ecosystem to handle SandDollar within my institution when I have debit card, credit card. And so communicating with the central bank, and they're aware of this, that the APIs, which are the interfaces effectively, I need it to be where, and this will address Jillian's point, I'm not holding a wallet myself because I don't need to hold a wallet, right? Meaning Fidelity. If Jillian and Gil want to hold wallets and they're customers of mine, I need to be able to allow them to move freely into their account, out of their account. But the truth of the matter is, me as Fidelity do not need to hold it. Right now, as it stands, and it addresses Jillian's point, if I do not have that interface, then yes, I have to hold a wallet so that I can move it back and forth with my customers, which means I have to tie up my financial resources in order to do so, when in reality, right now with a debit and credit card, I don't do that. So the aspect of the IT conversation is very, very real. The central bank acknowledges this because what was intended, and it may not be spoken about, the central bank actually never intended to administer SandDollar. Its intent was, it is a blockchain technology that has a distributed ledger with a viewpoint that it would effectively evolve to be managed by the banking system itself. But when you are creating, or not creating, when you are leaving the banks to have to establish a whole new ecosystem to manage. So I then have to do reconciliations. I then have to have my controls and the people that I'm going to say are monitoring.
It's like a new skill set.
New skill set, but new resources that I have to do for something that really is not adding a new service. Because people paying, using, Apple Pay, Google Pay, all of these initiatives are coming on stream, but using the same existing infrastructure. So I'm not managing something new. But if I have a new wallet, that's a new bank account effectively that I now need to have persons that are reconciling, etc. But to the point on interest, I don't think that's a very big issue as it relates to the banks. Now, consumers may have the concern. And the reason being is, how much interest do you earn by the money that's in your wallet?
little too.
No, in
less
your
than
wallet.
little.
The
Oh,
one is in your wallet.
Zero.
Okay. So the reality is, if it's in digital form in your phone, it's not intended that your SandDollar wallet is your investment stream, right? This is literally the cash that you would have in your pocket that would have earned you nothing anyhow, that you now have available to you to use in digital form. But to the point that Jillian raised, are consumers aware of the distinction? Because they will say that my bank account earns me interest, although they'll attack me and say not enough. But they'll say my bank account does, and I could use my debit card and I earn it, whereas if I put it into the SandDollar, but it goes to the other point, if I can move it between the wallet and my bank account, then my investment decisions are on the bank account. My use of the SandDollar is transactional, and that's really all it was intended to be.
Do you think that with the goal of, it was created to promote financial inclusion. So is the lack of mass adoption, is that a result of the particular market that is underbanked? There not being enough people to do that? So to Gil's point about KYC, if you have a digital wallet, that's easier to get than going to a bank and opening a bank account. And the idea is that you should be able to use SandDollar more easily and participate in the economy with the help of SandDollar, even if you don't have a bank account. But is it that like this use case just doesn't really exist in a meaningful way?
I believe that there's a deeper infrastructural conversation about digital identity and digital identity. And so once there is standardization around what is the required KYC across these platforms, and I believe that there's already some guidance around that, but there needs to be more portability of KYC. And this is something that extends beyond even the SandDollar. This is about friction points even when you get any bank account, right? There are a lot of pain points, and for us to achieve mass adoption, it needs to become more fluid in terms of the ease of onboarding. And that's something that will require maybe taking a broader view of what is the KYC, where can the validation points happen, and what are other screenings that are required, and how can that be programmatically included within the onboarding experience. And so once there is a trusted, portable digital identity, then it's much simpler for everybody in the ecosystem to be able to onboard while not having fears of lacking compliance or having not knowledge of the customer. And so I think that is the gap, and I know that there's being progress on it, but that is the real pain point in my view as it relates to how do you get 50,000 people onboarded. It needs to be reasonable for them to flip out their driver's license, the NIB card, passport, etc., and feel that they're in the game, they're in the ecosystem.
I'm going to be a little controversial here.
Please do.
I think when it said it was for financial inclusion, that was a complete mischaracterization, or it was a misunderstanding of why we don't have financial inclusion. So I'm going to disagree with Gil a little bit on this one, in the sense that to onboard for a low-risk customer is very, very simple, meaning, yes, your driver's license and a telephone with you, and you can be onboarded in any financial institution. And when I say low risk, if you are earning literally $500 a week, that is from a fairly standardized job environment, etc., you are deemed low risk. Now, what I will concede to is, do banks adopt that, and do persons embrace that? And that's a challenge. And to the point he's raising, being in the financial services sector, sometimes the regulators themselves fight themselves, because even though they write the regulation to make it that simple, the inspections, etc., tend to criticize you when you adopt that fairly low-risk onboarding approach. But if we are very candid, the people who are not banked are the ones who most likely do not want to be banked, and they do not want to be in the system. So who are a key component of our unbanked? They are immigrants, legal and illegal, who actually want the cash system because their employers are really not following all regulations in terms of national insurance, and their legal requirements relative to the employees. So they're paying them in cash. And so for those persons, I'm not going to say that you must pay me in a regularized form where I have to show an NIB number, right? Because that is now used as a sort of unique identifier in many situations. So I am actually not as welcoming of the formal system. Secondly, they are remitting funds in a very unsafe way. But again, the expatriation of funds in a lot of those communities is in cash.
Right.
And that is how they wish to do so, because on the other side, where they're remitting it to, they don't want people to know how much am I sending to my cousin, to my brother, because they're in dangerous environments. And if persons know I've sent them $1,000, they are actually now subject to persons who are monitoring their activity. So when we talk about inclusion, it is very much, like Gil said, we have to make it easy for you to onboard. But the central bank has largely done that. It's more about putting it into practice on the low risk ones. But we have to go a bit deeper and say, what are the social undertones that are preventing some persons from being banked? I'll end by saying this. There's no one, in my belief, and this is not me being biased as a banker, there's no one who wants to be banked today that cannot do so within literally a 24-hour period, right? Do they appreciate that, and have they tried in recent times? Because oftentimes the criticism, they tried it 10 years ago and they just said couldn't be bothered to do it anymore, right? What I will say some of the challenges are really the children accounts, which the Prime Minister has actually spoken to the banks about. I had a bank account from I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I don't know what KYC they gave him on me back then, but the fear and what has created the difficulty with children accounts is most bank accounts come with a debit card now, and it is who is legally responsible because who can contract, etc. And that is nonsense, if I'm again blunt, on the bank side, because the parent can simply opt to not have a debit card, right? I mean, I don't have to force you to have a debit card in that regard. And so we need to get to a point where we're saying everyone who wants an account can have an account. And yes, I agree with Gil. We have to make it as easy to do so, but make them aware that it is.
So I just wanted to add to this, and then I want to move to another question about the SandDollar, but to the idea of the financial inclusion, to say that everyone who wants an account can have an account, maybe, but there are some pain points in opening the account, right? We all know it can take forever to open an account. That's one thing. The second thing is that, let's say that you do have an account and you live in Andros. For you to do very basic financial transactions to get cash, I mean, how many ATMs are there in Andros? If there are ATMs in Andros, there's not many ATMs in every single part of Andros, right? So it's just the basic convenience of having access to funds that you can pay bills with or be paid by. That's part of the issue that I think is still not fully resolved, because there's not a lot of commercial banking services in all of the islands. So this is one of the things that is a gap that I hope that the SandDollar could address. In theory, this is what it was created for. But those are some of the things, but that gap still exists, right? And the fact that it's not widely adopted means that gap is still there because it's not being filled by commercial banking institutions.
The gap doesn't exist. And let me ask you this. You mentioned when you get paid for your consultancy services, how many times you get paid in cash nowadays?
Never.
And how often does it get remitted to your account electronically from whoever your clients and others are in terms of how you get the monies? And I'm not being nonchalant, right? Because there's a real life example in Exuma where we've just opened up a cashless branch in Exuma. And when I went down pre-COVID, so 2019, and had the conversation with them. Same thing was raised. We have to have a bank. And I said, what do you need a physical bank for? Well, we got to get cash. What do you need cash for? So if you're paying your employees by direct transfer, so they're getting their funds in an electronic form, all of them have a debit card. The merchants, so when they go to the food store, they go to the fast food or the chicken shack, they go to the doctor, they go to the clothing store. All of these are now accepting digital payments. So they can use a digital form, and we can speak to it. So they're getting money directly into their account, not in cash. What is it, this love affair with cash? And then when you talk about tourists that come to those second home environments, when they walk into your store and you say that you only accept cash, when they were willing to pay $200 in groceries, but they only have $50 in cash, how much sale do you have? You have $50. So this is one that I will say this much, that our challenge has been when the banks exited the islands, they did not do it in a palatable and a friendly manner that said, how do I help you to understand that you do not need to have the physical presence? If we look at Africa as the general environments, they have learned that I don't need to see the physical one. Bahamians like banks for what? Social outing. It is where I go to see my friend when I stand on the line, and each time.
Well, you're there for like an hour and a half, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but it's because they don't want to pay to say the teller, the one behind it. But it's not to be dismissive. It is saying that particularly the younger generation, they will tell you they have never even seen the inside of a bank, and they have no interest in seeing the inside of a bank. So when we say in the islands that the absence of an ATM is why people are not adopting, that can't be the case. It is more a situation of saying we are set in our ways. We were used to doing it this way, and it was thrust upon us or pushed down our throat, and we are resisting because we are a very rebellious set of persons. So if you give us the spoonful of sugar, the medicine goes down. If you try to force it down our throats, we rebel, and we say that you've oppressed us. But in Exuma, to close that same argument, when we opened up the coordination with the money transfer business right next door to us, in the first 3 weeks, everybody was coming in to deposit money and withdraw it because they just wanted to make sure it could happen.
Right.
Since then, nobody has an interest in getting cash because they've moved beyond that. And that's why the conversation that we're having tonight about Fintech, SandDollar, and all other digital payments is saying that we have to get away from the concept that banking means a physical structure that I go into because my money is not in there, right? It's not in the vault, I can't go see it. And actually the tellers and the persons who I speak to, the things that I need to do, I can do on my own through digital means.
So are people really using their phones to do financial transactions? Because I've seen some data, which maybe 2 or 3 years old, that showed that people, by and large, did not use their phones for financial transactions. And what I would like to know is, do you think that, or have you seen data that shows that yes, people are really using their phones for those types of transactions? And if they are not, do you think that there's a digital literacy issue associated with that?
What is using your phone? Because, and I mean, probably sounds like a dumb question, but I use my phone every day because people out there are stealing money off my card, right? So I have a debit card and I don't keep money on that account, but the second I'm going to pay, I transfer it to that account so I can pay it, right, with using my debit card. But I think you're talking about straight up scanning a code or something like that.
I'm talking about all the things that you could do in relation to payments, but on your phone. So that means if you're going to access your bank account, you're going to pay bills, or you're going to do whatever it is that you're doing. The data that I saw from a few years ago,
I do it every day.
I think maybe that's a demographic thing, right? But by and large, most people at least that participated in that particular research set did not use their phones for any type of financial transactions. And it may be like a level of comfort with using the phone, but I wondered if you have noticed that, for example, with your customers at Fidelity, and do you think that there's a a literacy issue there.
Well, I was going to say I left it to Gil and Jillian to answer, because certainly at Fidelity, our own statistics, meaning in terms of the volume of transactions that are through online mechanisms and ATM machines, are growing exponentially, and the in-person is declining exponentially. And it's very easy, persons don't like paying when they don't need to. So if I say that, and the in-person fee was not as a punitive element, and I can say how we determine it, I can't speak for my fellow competitors. I looked at the cost of my teller network, systems and everything, divided it by the number of transactions, and said that's how I came up with the per transaction teller fee, in-person fee. And the reality is, even before that, so on checks, our customers, because we've spent the time educating them on how to use online, our checks are down by 30% over just the last year alone. When we look at the number of online transfers, instead of persons actually coming in to request the same transfer, we've seen that grow by over 50%, because everyone has gone to online banking. They've now learned it. I say that you mentioned, is it a demographic element? And I would say it's an accommodation issue. Because one of the things, when you have a person who's more mature and don't have the full sort of understanding, you have to literally sit there and walk them through.
Right.
And to be honest, it is worth the investment, because you get them into a mechanism that is actually far more secure, because you have dual-factor authentication. You just have to make sure they don't give it to the grandchild, say, come child, keep this code, so when I have to put it in. But you have to educate persons in terms of how to do so. But the reality is, the audit trail, the ability to track movements, is far better when using the digital platforms. Mm-hmm. Is it widely adopted? I'll say this much. I don't pay a single bill, and that's me personally, and I am old people children, as they say. So I could tell you I resist anything that's digital. All I need my phone to do is answer and hear the person on the other end. But I pay all of my bills online. I do not pay a single vendor that I have by cash. And in the bank, I have instituted, my staff are even afraid to tell me they're writing a check to a vendor, because they know I'm getting ready to fire somebody. Because I said, we're a bank. If we can't promote digital transfers, so why are we doing business with someone who doesn't have a bank account? Because we're a bank. We could open up an account for them, and we pay them digitally.
I think that I would like to see, go ahead, Gil. I would like to see the research that shows that the majority of Bahamians are using digital services for financial transactions, because I think we're saying that, but we are all, I would say we have a high level of digital awareness, right? But I don't think, I would say, I'm not sure if that is the average person who is, probably not high on digital literacy. But Gil, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a distinction between, using your cell phone for WhatsApp and other things, and then using them specifically for financial transactions. I think just in terms of, an anecdotal review, you would say that there's extremely high cell phone usage in the Bahamas,
Yes.
right? The concept here that has to be underscored is utility. Yes, there's change management. Yes, there's adoption, and there are things that can be done around financial literacy. However, we have an enormous opportunity to equip the SandDollar to provide superior utility that will drive even more use. So what are the everyday pain points that people have? It's the speed of the other person receiving the transaction, if it's between commercial banks and that sort of settlement. Wire transfers, people will rush to Western Union and various ways in order to ensure that they get the utility. What they're chasing is the utility. If it is the scenario around investments, is it easy to move from SandDollar into a Bahamas government registered stock?
Right.
Is it easy now to have interoperability between the SandDollar and an overseas central bank digital currency? once we close the gap as it relates to the utility equation, then it will only be logical for people to meet their own goals through adopting what helps with that. And in order to achieve that, history will tell us that the private sector is what really drives innovation, right? And so there's an opportunity to provide API access in a very promoted way to various fintech companies, as well as other banks, technologists, etc., to make it easy to use the SandDollar to create various on-ramps to be able to activate what I think we all are excited about, which is a new era of possibility around what we can do with money. And this is we could probably talk about smart contracts and programmable transactions and how do you send money abroad quickly and all of the exciting stuff, which is more possible with a central bank digital currency than otherwise, in my view.
I agree with that. And I think that's a perfect segue to talk about the idea of cross-border trade, in particular with the SandDollar, because this would be a very efficient way to do that. So in terms of cross-border trade, I just want to provide some context to the questions here. So fintech and blockchain are causing major disruptions in the banking industry, and new banking rails are emerging that are challenging the monopoly that SWIFT has had on cross-border financial transactions for the past 4 decades. So all of us have made financial transactions, and you have to put in the SWIFT code if you have an international bank transfer. But sometimes those transfers take days, they're expensive. It's not a very transparent process. But there are other options like Wise, Ripple, XRP, and CBDCs that operate 24/7. They offer lower costs, faster transactions, and in the case of blockchain, they are territory agnostic. So there's a lot of shakeup that's going on that, as Gil, you alluded to, the SandDollar could offer some opportunities with. So I want to start just taking a step back from the SandDollar for this question. So although it's not really expected that the banking industry, globally or in the Bahamas, would really move away from SWIFT, how should Bahamian correspondent banks prepare for a world where cross-border payment systems may bypass traditional USD rails? And what are some of the risks that shift could induce? So for example, A, how do you prepare? And B, if the SandDollar could be used for this purpose, what are some of the things that would be associated with that?
Well, I think there are several, I'm going to say, confused points in that I think need to be clarified. The payment rails don't change sovereign currency. So Bahamian dollar is not a exchanged or traded major currency. In fact, the only people who accept Bahamian dollars outside the Bahamas is the flea market in Florida. And so unless you trading with them, the reality is I can't send Bahamian dollars to Germany to buy my Mercedes-Benz. I can't send it to China per se in terms of to buy my goods and services. And so we have to be very careful when we are seeing digital flow or in our belief, overcoming sovereign currency. The United States dollar is not the reserve currency globally because people love the United States sentimentally. It was the largest trading bloc in the sense that largest consuming market, largest capital markets, and so the currency was one that all international players got together in the sense of saying, well, what is it that we're willing to accept as having a universal value that we can actually peg to? So that's why oil, commodities, and others are traded in United States dollars, not Bahamian dollars. A bit more, I'm going to say technical conversation on that front, but coming back to your point, right now, the whole concept of SWIFT and how we do cross-border payments is being challenged, not just by what I'm going to say, the startups and the fintechs, Visa, MasterCard are introducing cross-border payment services. Again, it is looking at financial institutions in each of those jurisdictions to say, Gowon Bowe has a MasterCard in the Bahamas, Royann has a MasterCard in China, we can send between us. Yes, we will settle in whatever's the agreed currency. So I may be sending Bahamian dollars because that's what my bank is taking from my account, but that my bank then has to convert it into whatever it has to settle with between that. From a consumer perspective, we don't care as long as we have the money going to where we want it to be. There is a difference, though, when we talk about digital currencies or digital instruments, because I don't like the word currencies so much. Things like stable coins that you are seeing now being used more and more. And in fact, the major sort of merchant acquirers, the major processors, etc., are looking at, to the very point you said, how do I move money in multiple jurisdictions with a common value that everyone accepts, but removing the intermediary? So why is wire transfer now costly? You have to come to me, I have to go to SWIFT, SWIFT then has to go to Deutsche Bank then goes to the customer.
Right.
So I have intermediaries, and let's be real, no intermediary exists without compensation. So if I'm adding compensation effectively to multiple layers on this process, that makes it more costly. When I get to the blockchain technology and the use of what I'm going to call a common value system that is distributed amongst jurisdictions, I've now removed intermediaries. But the one thing I will say is this much, and I'll attribute it to the governor whether he likes me doing so or not. He said it's not about the one-way trip, it's about the round trip. So how do I get in and then get out? And the reason meaning that is, everyone is wonderful to say, how do I get my money across the pond, etc. But when someone is sending it back to you, what form do you want it in? Do you want it in digital form? Or do you want it in the form that you can spend in your domestic market? And so the tool that I use to move it is one thing. But the form that I want it to actually be in at the end of the day, because I can't go to Mr. Roberts and tell him I'm buying grocery with no stable coin. I need it to be in my Bahamian dollar. And so it is understanding, to Gil's point, the interoperability by saying, I use my sovereign currencies, use more innovative ways of how it exchanges, but understanding that the reason why you can buy from China today is because you convert your Bahamian dollars into US dollars, then to renminbi. In China, they want US dollars because ultimately that's how they make their foreign investment. That's how they use in the capital. So it is about utility, which is an excellent word that Gil said.
But is it possible for the SandDollar to have that kind of utility? Because if I understand you, well, yeah, so it cannot happen.
No.
Which means
not
that,
in its current, not because it is a Bahamian dollar.
right. So what would it take for it to have that utility? Because if it's only for domestic use, then we end up in the same situation where we are now, right? So if we take what you said in terms of like where's the use case, where's the real use case for it from a domestic standpoint, and it doesn't have the ability to facilitate international trade, then how can...
No, I don't. I wouldn't say it didn't do that. So to put something that Gil said, if I want to send, right now today, if you want to send $10,000 to the UK, right? You don't go and physically get pound sterlings. When you go to your bank to transfer it, what do you give the bank in order to transfer?
Yeah,
you say
BSD.
you give them
Yeah.
BSD. So SandDollar is no different. And I think this is why I'm saying let us not complicate something that is simple. What Gil spoke about is how do I make SandDollar interoperable with other systems that still require the conversion to a currency that is a major trading currency, but in a manner that is seamless. Right now, I have to go into the bank, I have to fill out the paperwork in order to make that transfer, I have to give them my Bahamian dollars, they then go behind the scenes, they have to convert it into whatever currency I'm seeking to do, or an intermediary that is doing that, and then it goes across. So the payment rails are becoming more sophisticated and saying that, you know what? We will have an intermediary in a local jurisdiction, that is willing to take Bahamian dollars because they're now trading that, because they're identifying. So there are going to be persons. I was being a bit cheeky when I said there's nobody who wants Bahamian dollars. The reality is a foreign direct investor that's coming into the country and paying for labor. Does he need to pay it in United States dollars? So he's happy to trade his United States dollars for Bahamian dollars because he's going to spend it domestically. And that's why on our balance of payments on the capital account is positive, whereas on the current account it's negative because we import more than we export. But the reality is there's always going to be trade, and that's why the foreign currency reserves is a conversation that is not so much tonight, but a part of the equation. And it's just about letting persons know that you can't take your Bahamian dollar that's in your pocket today, walk into an international jurisdiction and spend
use it.
it, just like someone who's coming here with a Cuban peso is not going to be able to walk into any store locally and spend that. Someone walking in here with a euro note is not going to be able to spend it in a store here because
Right.
it is not one of the currencies we accept. And so whether in physical form or digital form, that aspect of conversion
That doesn't
and market
change.
trade doesn't change.
Jillian, you were going to say something.
I was going to say the same thing, but I was going to use Chuck E. Cheese's as an example. Like, we have people come into Crypto While all the time, and I have to use Chuck E. Cheese as an example. So I was just going to break it down in that way. So nothing more to add. He got it.
You were going to say something, Gil?
Well, I still believe that the private sector has to be activated to create utility around the SandDollar because, you know, at the end of the day, interoperability requires cooperation. You know, there are, very real realities as it relates to, international currencies, and you need a trading partner that is willing to accept what you're about to exchange. And I do see trends and upskilling in general across even traditional systems. Even SWIFT is looking at blockchain technology, and the African Exim Bank has started an initiative that includes what's known as the Caribbean payment system and settlements, referred to as CPAS. And I believe the Bahamas and Barbados have been participating in a pilot. And so there is this narrative globally around this cooperation, right, where you have trading blocks looking at accepting local currencies between each other
Right.
in order to improve settlements. And so, certainly we can see that within the BRICS nations, we can see that within the Caribbean. And so I want to underscore that there's a lot behind the scenes that's involved with that word interoperability. But it is achievable and it's doable. And the customer, the user of the central bank digital currency, just wants the benefit. They want the utility. And we
Essentially.
have to all, as part of the ecosystem, collaborate in order to make all of these things happen. You got to catch the Forex and the conversion. You have to do the reconciliations. All of that has to happen. Now, I would say that one of the opportunities within the private sector is this concept around wrapping the SandDollar, right? How do you get a central bank digital currency on chain? And once you get it on chain, what does that mean in terms
And
of
on-chain
utility
is on blockchain.
within the blockchain? Now, of course, there are public blockchains, and then there are permissioned private blockchains. The additional challenge that we have on the interoperability front in the Bahamas is that we have exchange control. And so, in theory, if you were to put the SandDollar on a permissioned or closed ecosystem blockchain for use domestically, that would still enable you to be able to use smart contract technology to do things like the facilitation of loans and staking programs and other ways of using the SandDollar. When you start to look at public chain adoption, this is a much deeper conversation about exchange control and the minting process around a token, how you're receiving the payments in, and what are the the off ramps as it relates to persons wanting to get out of their position within the token. But it's very doable, and I'm hoping that the private sector quickens the pace around that, because that's what's going to make wider conversations like tokenization possible.
And
I
make
got
it,
you, buddy.
give it more utility.
I got
So
you.
I want to ask, just along those lines, in terms of fintech products that can facilitate the use, I know you don't want to use digital currencies, but just facilitate the use of digital financial transactions. What are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of products and services?
Yeah. I can't get this point out of my head, so I'm
Okay,
going to
go
touch on
ahead.
it, and it leads into that. But what Gil talked about just now is the long way around, right? Again, SandDollar is a retail currency, right? So you're not going to use that for, sending wholesale amounts abroad to do trade. So it may not make sense to wrap the SandDollar, but instead use it just for the on-ramp and off-ramp, right? Which means that you would just tokenize the deposit, whether it's in SandDollar or if it's in our regular fiat non-CBDC Bahamian dollar, right? Because then you would just tokenize that, right? So you would tokenize.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop y'all
sorry,
there because
my
y'all are,
geek- yeah.
y'all are getting a little bit deep in the tokenization.
But-
if you're, just explain, just break that down into very simple terms. When you say tokenize a SandDollar, what does that mean?
Right. So the SandDollar already exists on the blockchain for that transportability, right? But it exists in our ecosystem, and we're not exporting it because of the reasons that Gowon said, which is there's no market for it.
Right.
Right. So there's just those 2 points alone, like there's no reason to wrap it then to try to put it in another chain to pass it around all over the world. Instead, you should just stick with the intermediaries, which might be far few, and allow those intermediaries to add a little bit on, because now you have far more efficient transport of that value, and instead just allow the SandDollar to have people on ramp to larger tokenized asset, and then off ramp instead of wrapping the whole SandDollar, right?
And
So
if putting it in layman's terms, because I know it, and this is where it gets persons who know blockchain and have studied it, and I see a couple in the room today, in addition up here. Tokenization, very simply put, is taking what I'm going to call a tangible asset and putting it into a digital form that has embedded in the token. So when we speak about token, think about when we had the toll roads, and you used to take a token to go and pay for your toll.
Right.
Even Paradise Island
Paradise Island
Bridge.
Bridge,
If
yep.
we go far enough back, you used to have to buy tokens. The token was worth 25 cents, but it wasn't 25 cents. It was a token that took something that was tangible that you understood and put it into a token. When we talk about tokenization now, it's just digitizing. So when we talk about artwork, or we talk about properties, etc., the ability, and when Gil is speaking about smart contracts, instead of me saying I have the physical asset that I am taking paperwork to move around, I have embedded within a token all of the details relative to that asset that allows me to then move it more freely, because it is easier for me to move a digital token than it is for me to move a
The
1,000
actual-
pieces
right.
of paper. But I think to one of the things that you had, and you said the fintech and what are they doing? Again, we need to break down, well, what do we mean when we say fintech? Because again, we have an exotic viewpoint. How many persons know about Zelle, right? Zelle is fintech, right? Zelle seems to be so miraculous. I could put in my email address and I could pay to the other party. That's what you see. Behind that, Zelle is a closed ecosystem. It is only banks, or it only allows you to do that for banks that are on Zelle. Zelle created an app. Zelle then went to the major players and said, we want to make the movement of funds easier, where we can use the registered email or telephone number in your institution, so that I don't need to know my account details, my routing details, my ABA.
Yes.
I just need to put in your email, but your bank on the other side has all of that detail embedded already
So,
in your
I'm
ID.
glad that you segued into this because I have a non-SandDollar related question, and this is a very basic question to that exact point, to the idea of utility. That is a very easy thing to do because you can hop on that app, put in the email address that you already know, and send somebody cash, and it's there. And it's quick and it's easy, and you're done in less than 5 minutes. A, why do we not have that here? A. B, just in terms of other fintech products. So, all of us watch commercials that come out of different countries, and then you can see, apps that will help you find the best insurers, apps that will help you find the best credit cards. All these things that, again, to use that word utility, they make it easy for you to do the thing that you need to do in the least amount of time with the least amount of friction.
And cost.
And low cost, right? That's what I'm thinking about when I say fintech. We don't, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't seem to have either an existing market or a developed market along the lines of those products, or those products aren't in use here for one reason or another. So on the consumer side, which is where I sit, am I reading the room right? And if it's not part of the services on offer here, why is that not the case?
I want to hear the answer for why we can't have Zelle.
All right.
I would really love to know.
I was going to let them answer. The answer is there's no one. So Zelle didn't come about from manna from heaven. There was a developer that had an idea and a concept and went about and did it. The same concept can be adopted in the Bahamas in terms of someone developing an app, going to the banks and saying, I want to replicate the same thing, right? And what I'll say to you is, because you made a statement, I have the email I already know. If the person gives you an email address that's not registered with their bank for Zelle, it doesn't work. So it isn't that you just choose a random email.
That's fine. That's on the other side, right? But
I see.
It's just, but it's the thing though. Yes, anything that you do in order for that transaction to happen, the information needs to be correct, right?
Accurate.
So that aside, the point is that from the sender's perspective, all you need is the email, and you need your email, which you already know, and you need the other person to give you the correct email, which I think most people with an email address are capable of doing. Yeah. But the idea is that there are a lot of pain points. Like when I go into a bank, like I really have bank rage, and I'm like, I would rather do something that I know is going to be fast and easy, and it's actually going to do the thing I needed to do, and it's not going to cost a lot. So why don't we have those things here? And I understand the point that Zelle happened because a developer made this product, but the product is already made, right? Which means the technology exists. Is it proprietary? It's proprietary, but can another, you don't have to reinvent the wheel is what I'm saying. And Zelle has been around for a long enough time. There's Zelle, there's Cash App, there's Venmo, there's PayPal from way back in the day.
No, the answer really is, and this is one, again, I get in trouble because I am a banker. Sometimes the willingness of the banks to embrace when someone has come up with the technology and all say yes to come on board. But, and I can say that candidly because I will tell you there has been an attempt at a Zelle in the Bahamas, but I will tell you, I sat with the developer myself, and the only thing they had was the app. They had no understanding on the payment rail, which Zelle did understand. And so it is a little bit of saying, when you say, why do we not have it? My question to you is, why haven't you developed it?
Because I'm not a developer.
All right, but you have the idea that you would like to see it happen, and I'm sure you know developers, right?
Well, I think...
No, I'm not being facetious.
Yeah.
I'm being now saying, you know developers, and then you're saying, but I also need to have the expertise that says, who knows banking, and who knows payment rails, and who knows how this settles, right? So that we have it. But I'll give you a good news scenario. The central bank itself is looking at a fast payment system, right? And it is taking the initiative. So where people bash it all the time, let's give it credit. It is now saying that the private sector and the innovators who complain about it have not initiated it. So they themselves are initiating, going through PIX, which is in Brazil, because you mentioned BRICS and a lot of people reference it. They're looking at it from a perspective of saying, okay, these are the technologies, these are the infrastructure that need to be in place. And I guess there's a little bit more moral suasion that can be pushed by the central bank, because they can say to all of the banks in the country, if this exists, you could say no, but it isn't going to look very favorable if you're saying 6 out of 7 have said yes and you're the outlier. So it is in the works, it is in the progress of coming through. Who they're using for the developer, it's going out for RFP and all of the ones that are there, but it is coming along.
I'm just curious about why, and that's one product, right? But there are so many products that could make life easier that we don't adopt just from just fintech. But go ahead.
So this goes back, in my view, of activating the private sector. I think there's a beauty of differing opinions about what is sensible to tokenize or not. However, you do need to have a vibrant community of those who are working on various approaches to get rid of these pain points, that have the sophistication of understanding the payment rails and so on. Ultimately, for Zelle to work, the Clearing Banks Association and the way that you allow banks to settle balances between each other needs to be instantaneous. And so that's a back end conversation. But very, very doable, but it's going to take cooperation. And to the topic around tokenization, of course, when you take a view of tokenizing, let's say, a central bank digital currency, what you're in effect doing is you're creating a stablecoin scenario, right? Which is where the holder of that would need to now have confidence in what is vested within it. And so I don't want to get overly technical, but I do find that what the regulators can do in order to see a massive improvement in the speed of transactions would be to actively facilitate those conversations between the tech innovators and the banks.
Yeah. So, I have to go a little deep, but I can try to be quick. And Royann, a couple other people in the audience know this, and I think I mentioned to you this a couple of years ago, but you may not remember that right now I'm working on one of these fintechs, right? And to answer that question, it's a lot of what Gowon said but didn't say. It's not just the payment rails, it's not just having the developers, but it's understanding the regulation, it's understanding the compliance, it's understanding the risk management, it's having the right governance structures in place. And to Gil's point of having that community, we started, and this feels like a lot of shameless plug, but it's just truly what the issues are, right? We started Crypto Isle in 2021 to do exactly that. Build the community, train people to understand exactly what's needed to bring these products to fruition, and finding all the components to bring everything that's needed for one, something in the fintech sector, agri-tech sector, to bring all those components together with, and this sounds like shade, but it's really not, right? With the talent and the expertise and the availability of people here to like get it done. It's not the easiest thing. And Royann, you've like seen me like try to build this fintech for 2 years now, and it's only now coming to fruition where you have the right team, you have the right tech, you have all of those parts. So in this very, very, very small community, it's difficult to put all of those components together and then properly address the needs of the market in a way that the market is actually going to absorb. So kudos to central bank for moving forward, but if they don't approach the market the right way, then it's going to be an issue. And I have my own issue, and this is probably not something I want to say on camera, but I have my own issue with the regulator playing in the private sector space.
Well, yeah,
Right?
different
But-
conversation for a different day.
Yeah, but to have all those components right here locally for somebody to properly address the pain points of the local market, it is 1 in 50 million. And it's just really, really difficult to do. So you're not gonna just come with the app and say, hey, I created Zelle. Behind that app and behind every step of the client journey, or what should be the client journey, there's a whole lot of processes.
Right.
And we don't necessarily have the skill set to even execute those processes. So it takes a whole lot to build that one fintech
So
app.
I would say this, and then I want to ask one final question. I think from a consumer side, we don't know all the things that go on in the background.
Yeah.
But what I would also like to suggest is that there hasn't been a sense of urgency to explore that from a commercial bank perspective. And I'm saying that because you're not thinking about this in very abstract terms, right? There are products that exist in the world that, you know what, that developer exists. He's around. I didn't mean that. I mean that person. That person exists. They're around. They can be contacted, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but it does take a willingness to decide that, yes, you want to make your customer experience better. You want to make your operations more efficient, whatever that conversation is that happens on the back end. And then the intentionality to find those resources to make that possible. I think that there's not a sense of urgency around there because customers are not demanding it in a meaningful way. And therefore, there's not enough competition. And so there's no real incentive to have that hard conversation and then decide that you're going to invest the resources in doing that. That's from a consumer's perspective. That's how I see it.
Yeah. I'll only say this much, and you've said it many times. Why haven't you? And I go back, and it's not being facetious. Why haven't you? We keep having this as saying it is the big bad banks. Zelle wasn't the banks, right? Now, one party in this that we haven't spoken about is government, which has, if you will, the responsibility for being facilitators. Jillian spoke about something that we haven't spoken about. How do you make the environment welcoming and incentivizing in order to do these things, right? Because when you say, so let's say Fidelity would love for you to be able to use Zelle. It doesn't matter if RBC, CIBC, Scotiabank, Commonwealth Bank, Bank of Bahamas, and Citibank are not on it. So what I'm trying to draw out is it's not the individual banking institutions, because the reality is banking is always going to exist because banking is a fiduciary relationship, and that has gone from traditional brick and mortar to completely digital, loan application, loan disbursement. You know, you look online, there's a whole series of challenger institutions as it relates to lending, as it relates to deposit taking. I was just in Brazil recently, the largest, and I didn't even know the name, right? Digital bank that was sitting in Brazil. And the reality is they have 130 million customers, right? So when they looked at me and said, well, how big is the Bahamas? I had to laugh because they said, man, we have 400,000 people talking about customers. But the reality is that when we sit down and we have this conversation, to the wider point that both Jillian and Gil referred to, we have to decide as a country, and this is where now my shameless plug for the National Development Plan. You as a consumer, and your viewpoint may be very common, but we as a country have to decide, how is it we are going to become competitive, and what are we going to do to facilitate that? So we brought in Estonia. We were talking about digital IDs, and we were talking about the sort of digitization of our public records so that you could go online and you could see, you know, get your health records, your driving records, your passport, and all of that, so that it was all in lockers, etc. And it did not advance. And to be perfectly honest, there's only one, I'm going to call it agent, that can touch the lives of everyone, and that's government. And so we have to be more intentional about saying to government, what is it that we want to see you doing? Do we want you out there pumping out water? This is not me being casting shade. Or do we want you to set up where we are developing architecture that allows us not to have to pump out water. And I use that as the example because in one instance, the government is the provider. They're providing the relief. In the other one, they're facilitating relief that they will not have to provide any further.
Right.
So it's that concept of teach a man to fish versus give him a fish. And it's not, by no means am I suggesting that it is solely the responsibility of government.
It's
But
shared responsibility.
It's government, it's private sector, but it's citizen. And we can't sit as armchair quarterback saying, private sector didn't do this, government didn't do that, and we're sitting in our lounge chair and we didn't do anything either. So we have to become an activist nation that says, if we want all of this, then we are not simply saying it. We are now starting to galvanize the very people that we know and say, well, let's start a movement sufficient to get the attention of those that are around us.
This goes back to, well, I'm in marketing, so I still think it goes back to what are consumers demanding, because that does help to drive the private sector conversation, and that could in turn help to drive the government conversation with regards to creating the regulations and policies that can nurture that, right? So let's use that as our last question. I want to thank you very much, and let's open up the floor to questions from the audience. Yes, please. Thank you.
Good night. Great panel discussion tonight. I think one of the biggest problems we have in the Bahamas is that when you are innovative and creative, you're crushed by the policymakers. Let me give you a case in point. Years ago, we introduced, in Kenya and Africa, they have the mobile payment system. We introduced that to the Bahamas through a prepaid debit card called the Easy Cash card, way before Island Game, way before Canoe. And when we went to the regulators, they said, where do you think you guys are going? We come in here to innovate. We came here to create. And what we did, our whole process was set up where Bank of the Bahamas was the bank, but Telco was going to be a prepaid debit card powered by the Bank of the Bahamas, where we had the unbanked utilizing the prepaid debit card system. We were blocked, we were stopped, and we told to go someplace else. We were the first company in the Bahamas to actually launch a cryptocurrency way before Sam Bankman-Fried. The regulators came after us and closed out our bank account. We were not hiding, we were not running, we were paying the taxes. They closed us out, and when we asked them, could you give us a reason why you closed out our account? You know what they told us? It came from the top. So when we talk about innovation and creativity in the Bahamas, it starts with the government and it ends with the government. And I want to put 3 questions to the floor. One of the questions is, we talk about the digital dollar, and I've spoken to many central banks, governors in their offices, and I told them, let's get rid of the Bahamian dollar. Dollarize the Bahamian economy, let US dollars flow through the economy. The $7 billion would be up with the 55 passport holders that is in Switzerland. We could have that money move back home in our economy. We could innovate, we could create, it would lower our interest payments on mortgages, on loans. And then you have multi-currency account, the British pound, the Canadian dollar, Swiss franc, Japanese yen, all the multi-basket of currencies that we trade with in our central banks. I want your thought on that. And on the Fintech application, in terms of that application being pushed by the private sector, I know when it's pushed by the private sector, the bottleneck stops with the government. I know you don't want to touch that like that, but because of where you sit, but that's been my experience. Thank you.
Yeah, on the U.S. Dollarizing the Bahamian economy, I'm going to say that there's different schools of thought and philosophies, and I'll just answer it this way. Yes, dollarizing has significant benefit, but it also has significant constraints that we have to be conscious of, because whilst we do not print money wantonly and without regard for the reserves, the reality is we do have flexibility, and you see it in Jamaica, etc., where you can use currency values as temporary tools. Now, we just haven't. And so, to be honest, we are a disciplined enough nation, and the US dollar peg is actually what has protected us fiscally for many years. So I'm probably one that would say to you, I could see the merits in it and would explore it further. But I'll tell you, whilst you say you've spoken to many governors, I'll tell you what one prime minister said to me. The day I burn the note that has the face of Sir Lyndon on it, I will never be reelected. And the comment was this, that we see sovereignty in things that actually globally have no real value, but you have to get the citizenry past that. So the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter which notes we use in our economy, but if the citizens feel pride in having a Bahamian dollar that says to them, this is ours, you have to educate them as to why you shift. So I would say to you, it's not a flip the switch, because even though the policymakers and the central banks may be of a mindset with that, that is one of those scenarios that you have to take to referendum. And when I say that, not legal referendum, you cannot do it against the will of the people. And it's one that we just have to say, persons have to understand what you're speaking about, and sometimes that's esoteric, as opposed to the layman.
Go ahead, Gil, you had a question or a comment, sorry.
It's a two layered question. I will say that I feel that the regulators have a very difficult job, which is that they need to manage the reputation of the Bahamas in the global context in the evaluation of innovation, right? And so, and because the reality is that we are a country that is pegged to the US dollar, and we have to manage reserves and also supervise what those reserves look like from day to day. For that reason, when you talk about a prepaid card solution or so on, I think the intricacy in your particular your business proposal is regarding the net inflow and net outflow and the ability to monitor that. And so probably a prepaid card solution that is in partnership with a local commercial bank that has the supervision and the monitoring around it might be a way to tweak your proposal for it to be more approachable. Otherwise you have foreign entity provider of prepaid cards, and you have a flow this way as it relates to currency without easy oversight, let's say. And there's an intervening conversion role that credit cards have. You pay on Amazon or you pay on an online website, there is a conversion that's happening within that facility. I feel that the regulators have done a masterful job, right? And this is me honestly speaking as it relates to putting in the right infrastructure in terms of policy. That's across compliance, and then that's also in terms of our DARE Act, in terms of our carbon credits legislation, in terms of being at the forefront with even talking about the central bank digital currency being the first out. And so it's difficult to become a master without first mastering the basics. I always like to say, master the ordinary before you master the exotic. And I feel that now we have put in place a good framework as a foundation. It's easier to probably have the conversations that you had early on. I believe, and this is probably just my own patriotic view, but I think that in looking at diplomacy and the dynamics of geopolitics, and even conversations about, what is the reserve currency and so on. I like the flexibility of having our own currency, but I do also see massive benefits around a dollarization conversation. So this is probably a debate that's been going on for a whole long time. But I personally am on the side of the equation of maintaining the Bahamian dollar.
Next question. Thank you for your question. Good question.
Thank you for your presentation. Very informative. I wanted to branch off of your last comment when you mentioned about taking a consumer perspective, and that sparks a conversation in that I feel the problems that we're trying to solve, it's being solved from a technical aspect as opposed from a consumer's perspective. And when you say it like that, you have to almost question who who SandDollar is really made for. And I say that in the context of it's not very user-friendly. I don't know if you ever tried to use it, but even for tech-savvy people, it's very cumbersome. And even when we talk about understanding the technology, persons don't need to understand technology to use technology. They call it the black box effect. People just will know you push the button and they get the result. We have persons in this country now, they cannot read or write, but they send in voice notes on WhatsApp. I don't know how Netflix know what show I like, but two hours later, I still binging. So persons don't need to know the technical aspects. They just want to know that their actual problem is being solved. And even when you think about this, the problems it's supposed to solve, even the speed of usage, imagine the persons you say the unbanked. These are people who catch in the bus, just hypothetically. You trying to catch a bus by $7, just think how that dynamic gonna go. It take almost 5 minutes just for you to do the transaction. The bus driver could run you off with a cutlass probably. So where is the actual practical aspect when you really look at it? When we have other technologies such as tap and go, where a person's paying for their groceries, they tap and everything else. With SandDollar, it's just like I said, a more cumbersome process, and not to bring it beat on SandDollar, but I just say that to say the problems that we have, it needs to be looked at, I feel, from a customer perspective.
Well, let
Thank
me
you for your
defend
comment.
SandDollar on that one first, right? So SandDollar, you're talking about the transfer, but SandDollar is set up with near field communication technology, which is the same thing tap. So the bus, actually, I would say that's a perfect example you have. If the bus system was smart, they would actually have the SandDollar sitting as a terminal right at the front, because right now, instead of people cussing because they give you $2 and can't get no change, you could actually give them the proper $1.50, and it isn't that it's going to take 5 minutes. They walk on with their phone and they tap really on your phone that is sitting there, and you go and sit in your seat. The point, and I just want to say this much, it's not about the convincing of the consumer. It is understanding that the consumer is the end user. It is about the education and understanding of those who provide to the consumer. Meaning, so the conversation that we had tonight was not geared towards the consumer having to learn why these things are not possible. It was the stakeholders and the invested parties that have to understand how they work together in order to produce an end result to a consumer is what they're demanding. And what Royann said, which is, I think, is important. We don't do enough empirical. I always say in the Bahamas, we do plenty sort of hypothetical and what we think and what we feel. Empirical analysis just isn't something that we do consciously and consistently. So when she asks, what are consumers asking for? Yeah, we have some survey houses that do them, but they're generally hired by what I'm going to call a private sector party that, whether we like it or not, it's biased towards the answer they want to achieve. So when we're talking about having statistics like Nielsen in terms of what people are watching on
independent
TV,
research. Yep.
when we're talking about just having data analysis that is available for all and sundry to access, again, I will tell you that goes back to government saying this will make it better in the country for innovators to have access to data to allow them to solve a problem. But we have to educate them to understand why it's of value to do it independent as opposed to it being initiated by Gowon or being initiated by
I still
Gil.
maintain, and I know that we're just at where we should end right now, but I have to say that I still think it comes down to, I agree, government should provide an environment in which, those things can be developed. But, it is, if an institution or an industry group determines that it is worth it for them to make that investment, they're going to find it. Like, people know about other things, right? People who lead these institutions know about other things. They know about other products. And if the interest was there, and if they determined that the market was large enough, and you have data, you could make a decision to find out more, at least find out more about it, and then maybe you can use that as a competitive advantage, right? It may not be every component of every product, but there's something that you can do if you're interested. There is something that you can do to make your operations better, to make your experience better, to make those transactions more seamless for the end user. But again, like, it's driving that from the consumer side, but it's also being willing to get that data and understand that if you can make a business case for it, are you willing to make the investment? That's from the other side of that equation. That's how I see it. So we're at the last, but you had a short comment or question, please. This will be the last one.
Okay, thank you very much. Enjoying the conversation. Wanted to piggyback on what was mentioned earlier about M-Pesa in Kenya. I've used it, and I'm able to use that to send transfers to different commercial banks there as well. Now, as we were sitting here, I downloaded SandDollar for my device for the first time. I logged into my Fidelity app, and I tried to actually send money from my Fidelity account to the SandDollar account, but it's not on the list. And so I wonder, does SandDollar need to be a part of the Clearing Banks Association in order to be where you can transfer from SandDollar to the banks and from the banks to SandDollar?
And the answer to that goes to what I was saying in terms of it being with the right APIs. So the answer is you can actually, from Fidelity, so I could speak, send to SandDollar, but we send it through central bank. Meaning, again, because we're not funding the wallet. So when you're wanting to put it to your wallet account, you have to send the money to the party that will load the wallet, because we don't have a SandDollar wallet to send to your wallet. So when you just said, I want to send money from my savings account to my SandDollar account, well, you're asking for actually SandDollar to be put onto your SandDollar account. I don't have the mechanism to do that, but I could send it to central bank. And equally in the reverse, when you want to transact it back from your SandDollar account to Fidelity, the central bank has the ability to send it back. But you highlight exactly the point that I'm making, that for you, it is of no use because it's not like your credit card that you could transfer back and forth on your app. And we've said to central bank, several of the banks, that's where we have to get to, where in reality, we do not become wallet holders in order to facilitate this. We have the appropriate interfaces that allow us just to transact between persons that have digital wallets for SandDollar. So it is exactly as you said, and it is that one that you don't want it to be like a payee. You don't want it to be BPL, where you drop down and you say SandDollar, but that's how it would have to operate right now because it's not set up with that API interface.
That's a really good question. I'm glad you did it here because you can actually see what we're talking about in real time. So with that, I'd like to bring our conversation to a close. Gowon, Jillian, Gil, thank you very much for your insights. It's very interesting. I think I learned a lot. Hope you did too. Thanks for your fantastic comments and questions and observations. And I'd like to thank the team at The Current for hosting Inspired By. If you'd like to stay up to date on our talks, visit inspiredbyconvos.com. You can watch a recording of this session on inspiredbyconvos.com. You can follow The Current at The Current Art 242 on YouTube, where you can also watch the session and follow on Instagram. And I want to thank you again for being great panelists. Thank you again for being a great audience, and good night.